I want to ask you something I asked you before, actually. Most of your writing, how things have come to be the way they are, is based on, as you said, you know, the dominant culture of North America, Anglo-American history, so the history of where you are from. Yet there are people who seek you out from many different places. So when I listened to you for the first time a few years ago, that was in Bali, with a big group of North Americans, Australians, maybe a few Europeans. And I asked you about something, what does that mean for me? And you said, or someone like me, and you said something like that, you know, you don't claim to know anything about anywhere else but where you come from, and that I should better ask someone who looks more like me. And yet I'm here again asking you. And I know that you speak quite a humorous way about the way we, you know, go after other cultures' rituals and things, you know, like many people who might watch this in my circles back home in Turkey, and this is a big generalization, I'm guessing might know more about, you know, Buddhist chants than anything from our ancestors. So I understand what you mean about that, but this doesn't feel like the same thing. And I guess what I'm asking is, why do you think young people or middle-aged people from other cultures are seeking you out?
Okay. I have to guess about this, but I think I can make a decent guess about it. And I hope this doesn't sound too immodest, because my estimation of what I've done is genuinely modest and small proportioned. But there is a phenomenon, there's a kind of thing that nobody intends that can happen anyway, and that's what you're asking about. I think the reason it comes about is twofold. One, if I've done well in the particular dilemmas of a particular place, then in a mysterious way, though the particulars might change from place to place, and they do, and they should, the fact of being able to focus and make the particulars tangible in one example, that example becomes available to other people as an undertaking, not the results of it, but the process of trying to wonder that way becomes accessible to others as an example of how to wonder. And that might sound like a strange formulation to you, like everybody knows how to wonder. Well, that's not what I've seen. No, people know how to be afraid, and they know how to have prejudices, but wondering is a particular kind of discipline, right? You have to be able to do it without trying to be successful, or to do that work without getting paid to do it. You see it, because it's its own marvelous consequences can come to you. So I suspect that one of the things that's happened is that there are people in a general way of good faith who have observed my example rather than any particulars of my conclusions. And the example has become useful to them. So that's one. The second answer is not as encouraging. People in a time of personal calamity or cultural undoing or pandemic, you know it, and I know it, and most people listening know it, that they will try anything if things get desperate enough, right? And what it indicates is an unwillingness or an inability to believe in the particulars that are available where they come from and from whom they come. So it is a hallmark of modernity wherever you find it, that one of the first casualties of being a modern person in the modern world is your lived connection with the people who precede you. Now, why is that such an automatic consequence? Maybe, it's a different question and something we could talk about if you want to, but from what I've seen and what I understand, there's something about the nature of not wanting to be old-fashioned, of wanting to be contemporary and not left behind and all the rest, that translates into leaving the past behind. Now, this is a monstrosity in many ways because there is no future to inhabit. When you finally get a chance to inhabit it, it's not the future anymore, it's the present. So you could reasonably say the future never happens. So when people are living a life full of tomorrow, which is what dreams and all those kind of things are about, they're living a kind of house that's in the sky, it's in the air. It's all about ideas. It's not grounded in tradition. In fact, tradition is one of the enemies of forward-thinking people. I don't know if this is true or not, but I'm afraid that it's possible that North America may have invented the idea of modernity as we know it today, with all its prejudice against the past. And why do you suppose it was North Americans of anybody else in the world who came up with this kind of poverty? My answer is it's because of what I said earlier. We were obliged to live in the presence of a rupture in cultural continuity, right? Who are we? Are we lost Europeans? Are we misplaced people from a late medieval culture that couldn't bear itself any longer and kind of exploded across the world? And are we the fundamental perpetrators of the worst excesses of colonialism and imperialism? And I mean, the answers to all of these questions are mostly yes. But why was it us in particular that came up with this kind of poverty? And the answer is, that's how we began. And we've mistaken our poverties for freedom, personal freedom, freedom of style, freedom of thought, right? Freedom of action. And our freedoms are the most lonely. I suspect that if I have any attraction to lonely people, I mean culturally lonely people, culturally poverty, and some attempt, I suppose, to take what I'm talking about and put it into the hole that was once their cultural life. And, I'm very sad to acknowledge that, of course, and it certainly wasn't my plan, but it doesn't surprise me. I should also say the third answer would be, it is in many ways a compliment to be sought out by people who are not your people. Of course it is. But you and I particularly understand that there's no such thing as faithful translation, right? Not either in language or in idea. The best you can do is find something that has the same consequence in your place as you imagine it has in the place where it came from. And so maybe there are people who take some encouragement from the fact that from very unpromising beginnings, I was able to craft, in this case of Daiwai's, a book that had some sanity in it. And if the example is useful to people, well, I take that as a compliment. I'm glad that it is. And I'm not sitting here pretending I didn't do anything. I know I did. and I know that there's merit to it. I feel very complimented if people who come from elsewhere imagine that there's something there for them. I hope there is too, but let's not just pretend that it's easy to take what I did and apply it somewhere else. It wasn't easy to do what I did, and it's no easier to translate it into somebody else's life.
So there's a question from our lovely editor and publisher about translation. And she asked me to ask you how you were persuaded to be translated. And I guess she's asking because of what you say about translation.
Right. Well, it wasn't hard, was it? I think very simply, I was asked, and you know, I'm someone who loves a compliment as much as anybody else does. And it's an enormous compliment to be invited to have your work appear in another part of the world in a language you don't understand one word of. It's extraordinary, right? I mean, I compare my experience with the Turkish translation idea with an early inquiry that came from a German publisher who became aware of the book. And this is what they said. This is a true story. He said, you know, it's a really good book and we would publish it except for two problems. I said, really? Well, because I'm thinking maybe we can fix the problems. And he said, yeah, first of all, it's too long. And second of all, it's about death. Otherwise, it's a great book. So what are you going to say? You know, I don't think it's too long, but it's long. There's no doubt. And I can recognize in the length a writer who was concerned that he may never get to do it again. And so I put a lot of things in there that have a kind of tangential relationship to dying, not that obvious. And you know, as you've heard from me just now, this is because I understand myself to be a culture worker, a psychological to get the culture to appear on the page. I don't have any fantasies about that a Turkish audience will somehow magically benefit from my work and from your translation of it. I mean, that would be great, you know, but I know that the principal work of translation is a different kind of work than the work that I did. I had to translate the extraordinary dilemmas that I saw in my working life. That was my translation. At the end of the day, it's your ear that the Turkish reader is hearing through. It's not my voice, it's your ear, right? And it's extremely delicate operation, and God knows how you did it. Whether or not I don't think it's me in Turkish. I think what it becomes is a Turkish possibility that came from what I did. It's a different emphasis, right? It's a very noble undertaking that's a little bit doomed to some failure, right? And some strange limitation and some mutation that neither one of us thought about at the time. But it's a noble failure. It's a noble thing to undertake. And I don't really mean, when I say failure, I don't mean it's wrong. I simply mean, you know, you may have a dream of a kind of pure manifestation that the translation is, only to realize, no, it's not a Turkish translation of what I did. It's a Turkish book that's a response to what I did. And I'm very pleased that that's happened. I'm very honored by it. And I wrote the foreword to the Turkish translation with that very dilemma in mind. And finally, I think I said in the foreword something like, death is not the place where all the differences between us disappear. In other words, there is such a thing as a Turkish death and a Canadian death and an American death and so on, right? Because you die as a linguistic being, among other things, and your language gives you a way of understanding death or keeps it from you or both. And I'm glad we did it, and I'm very glad that the publishing house thought this was a good idea, or at least I presume they thought it was a good idea, or they think it's a good idea now. Whatever it is, it's a happy and strange event in my life.